Okay, good evening. Welcome to another installment of Building the Scottish State. And I luckily have Craig Murray with us this evening. We were supposed to have had him on Friday, but he had a little bit of sleep issues, so he didn't join us. But I'm very glad that you're able to join us this evening. So first of all, thank you, Craig, for being with us.
Well, thank you very much for asking me.
Yeah. So just tell us about the last couple of weeks. I mean, just kind of what you've been through. I mean, of course, you have this court case hanging over you, and then I believe you were selected to be on the Alliance for Independence list, and then Alex Salmond's, started the ALBA party, and then AFI, I believe, disbanded. Just tell us about your experience over the last few weeks and how you've been holding up.
Yeah. Well, I should start, I suppose, with the court case where the judges found that I was in contempt of court. I was charged with 3 different counts of contempt. I was charged with publishing information that might influence the jury, and I was acquitted on that. And I was charged with publishing information about the exclusion of a juror, and I was acquitted on that. And I was charged with 8 or 9 counts of publishing material that might identify a juror. And they decided I was in contempt on 4 of those. I mean, to my astonishment, to be honest, because my contention is that I didn't identify any jurors. There's empirical evidence to show that. There's empirical evidence to show that mainstream media identified, sorry, not jurors, witnesses. There's empirical evidence to show that mainstream media identified witnesses or complainants to a much greater extent than I did. And in fact, reading the judgment and knowing who the complainers are, I can tell from the judgment who 2 of the people they think I identified are. I'm genuinely reading through the judgment. I can't even tell who 2 of the people they think I identified are myself, let alone how they think anyone else can tell. It seems quite extraordinary, and there's no real evidence given as to how they think I identified these people, or it's not that I identified them, it's that I published material likely to contribute towards identifying them. So I'm very much surprised, disappointed, obviously, but very surprised by the judge's decision.
And those are three judges, like a tribunal?
Yeah, well, it was a tribunal of three judges. Exactly how it works, I don't know, because there were a different 3 judges giving the verdict than there were at the hearing. One of the judges had changed. So which 3 judges it is, I'm left slightly uncertain of. But also, it genuinely is, I think, very worrying. There's an excellent article by Alexander Mercouris on Consortium News, which I recommend people to look at, Alexander Mercouris on Consortium News, where he analyzes the judgment. And obviously it's my own case, so I'm not an objective observer. But I think it's of genuine concern that they more or less say, that they come extremely close to saying that you cannot, in a sexual allegations trial, publish anything that the defense case say. Because, and they do say in terms, the prosecution will already have published so much material and released so much material. For example, and they say this, the place and date of the offences occurred, or the alleged offences occurred, the circumstances in which they occurred, which give clues as to who the people were who were there. They say that so much information will already be in the public domain from the prosecution that if you add to that any extra information from the defense case, then you are creating a risk of identifying. Therefore, what they don't say, but it follows in logic from everything they write, the defense case can never be published. No information from the defense can ever be published. And of course, in the case of the Alex Salmond trial, I was the only person who published in any detail at all the defense evidence. It's only people who have read what I wrote of what the defense evidence was, or who have read people repeating what I wrote, material for which I'm the source, who have any idea why Alex Salmond was acquitted. And this is actually extremely important, because the narrative which has been promoted relentlessly by Nicola Sturgeon and by her supporters is that in some way this was an erroneous verdict, that the jury made some incomprehensible decision, and plainly, although the jury found him not guilty, plainly he was in some sense really guilty. Whereas in fact, there were defense witnesses who on case after case after case contradicted the evidence given by the accusers. And in fact, by and large, it was impossible that both the defense and the accusers were telling the truth. Both the defense witnesses and the accusers were telling the truth. And just to give a couple of examples of that, there's the case of the woman who wasn't there, who witnesses said was not at the dinner where she alleged that she was assaulted. And there are cases of, for example, the woman who claimed that she reported an incident to her line manager, and her line manager gave evidence and said that just did not happen. She reported no evidence. She reported no such incident to her at all. Now, they can't both be telling the truth. And the jury decided which one they believed was telling the truth. Now, what the judges are saying is you cannot publish any of that. You cannot publish any of that because it gives a clue as to who the accusers are. And that means, that's a fundamental attack on freedom of speech. That means only the state's case. And remember, every prosecution is made by the state. It's the state who are the prosecution. It means only what the state says may be repeated at a trial. And what the defense says may not be repeated. You must not contradict the state. And that is a fundamental attack on freedom of speech, and really pretty scary. People should be worried about this. Mainstream media aren't worried because they think this would never be applied to them. They think, well, the mainstream media already know damn well that they did much more towards identifying complainants than I did. And yet I'm the only one prosecuted, because mainstream media know this is about selective political prosecution, and they themselves are safe. The government's not going to go after them. It's only going to go after dissidents like me. So nobody is taking up the real difficulties for freedom of speech of having this terrible precedent on the in the legal records to be used as a precedent in other cases.
Now, was this policy all under the revised policy of that Sturgeon signed off on, that Leslie Evans had helped create? Was all of the was the prosecution of Mr. Salmond largely based on what this policy stated, that they revised
what happened? The policy was based on two cases. Just two cases. One being the Sleepy Cuddle case, and as it's known, where the one case where it is acknowledged by both defense and by prosecution that something actually happened, and where Alex Salmond acknowledged it was inappropriate because of their work relationship and apologized for it at the time, and the apology was accepted. And then on a second case, which was the allegation that somebody's bum was touched during a photo shoot at Stirling Castle. And that second case comes into this category of cases where that second case comes into this category of cases where the evidence contradicts directly what the accuser said, because two people who were people were all crammed onto a small balcony, and two people who were sort of 3 feet apart either side, watching while this particular photo was taken. Direct eyewitnesses both said nothing happened. It just didn't happen. And Alex Salmond himself said it just didn't happen. But those two cases were the sole foundation of the Leslie Evans process. All the other additions, all the other cases, which were all things that didn't really happen, or which were exaggerated absolutely out of all proportion, they were got up subsequently after the Evans process, in this process where Peter Murrell and Susan Ruddick and others tried desperately to get others to join in and to make as many allegations as they possibly could for the criminal trial. There were only 2 cases in the civil process. The other 7 cases were all got up subsequently to add to the attempt to get a conviction under the Morov doctrine that similar incidents count as corroboration.
Okay. All right. And so let's turn to slightly more positive issues regarding the creation of ALBA and your thoughts on it, and how you see if ALBA is able to get significant numbers of seats, how that could change the process, and why do you think it is that the SNP is so, the SNP leadership is so, I mean, obviously it's Alex Salmond for obvious reasons, but you know, they're still, even though in the list seats, the more they you know, the more the SNP gets, the less, I mean, the more unionist seats would, well, anyway, just talk about the creation of the ALBA party. I'm getting lost already on this list seat stuff. So
I think the key thing to understand about the creation of the ALBA party is that it's not really related to, it is not a reaction to what happened to the failed charges against Alex Salmond. It's not about that. It's about something else entirely. But ALBA party is about the fact that the SNP has wasted its mandate, wasted several mandates, but it had a very direct mandate to hold IndyRef 2 if the UK exited the European Union.
Yeah, and there was a change in material circumstances.
Change in material circumstances. And everybody knew that the change in material circumstances clause in the manifesto meant Brexit. Everybody knew what that meant. Brexit happened. The SNP had the mandate, and they squandered it. They didn't use it. And many of us have been dubious about the commitment of the SNP to independence for some years. It doesn't seem to have been top of their agenda. Identity politics seems to be top of their agenda. Plus, they're very interested in trying to provide good colonial administration. They're very interested in, you know, they genuinely want to do things like give iPads to kids for schools and improve play parks and that stuff. They actually genuinely want to do that because they believe that will make life better for the people of Scotland. And maybe it will, but it's not independence. But they've lost sight, rather, in the detail of colonial administration and in convincing themselves that they're making the world a better place by administering COVID a bit better than Boris Johnson did. And frankly, my cat could, you know, administer COVID better than Boris Johnson did. But in persuading themselves they're doing all this good work, they've just got so into running the devolution settlement, they've forgotten about independence almost. And ALBA is a party for people whose number one priority is independence. And if there is an ALBA group in the Scottish Parliament, the SNP aren't going to be able to forget about independence, because they will have people who are more pro-independence than they are sitting there daily pressing them to actually honour their mandate and actually deliver an indie ref too. And that's what ALBA is about. It's born of the frustration of people that the SNP appeared to have abandoned independence as a practical thing. The SNP was still, of course, claiming to believe in independence, paying lip service to independence, but actually doing nothing at all about it, except introducing totally pointless bills with no dates on, saying we will have an independence referendum one day. And of course, obstructing Martin Keating's in court. The Scottish government directly intervened against Martin Keating's because Boris Johnson is now the excuse for not delivering independence. Mm-hmm. This idea that there has to be a Section 30, there has to be London's agreement, that's what the SNP are hiding behind. Now then, of course, there are many good people in the SNP still, but the large majority of members of the SNP are excellent people, and the large majority of members of the SNP do want independence. Many of them are curiously blind to the fact that their leadership keeps marching them down a cul-de-sac that doesn't lead to independence. But a few more eyes are opening, let me say it that way. And there are good people, not just in the SNP membership. There are some good people among the MPs and MSPs. And the SNP still remains officially committed to independence. And the only way we're going to get independence at the moment is through the SNP. We need ALBA to keep the SNP honest and keep it pointing in the direction of independence. That's why people are being asked to vote for the SNP in constituencies, where frankly the SNP are going to clean up. All the signs are the SNP are going to clean up. And then for ALBA on the list. But for me, it's not just a mathematical thing. And it's true that an SNP second vote on the list in six of the regions is utterly wasted. And in the regions where it's not utterly wasted, it's severely diluted. That's true as a mathematical proposition. But for me, it's much more important that the commitment of the SNP to independence is in doubt. And therefore, I would urge people to vote ALBA even if the SNP had a chance of being elected on the list, which, by and large, it doesn't.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think the SNP leadership has been reluctant to do that? You talked about them being comfortable in colonial administration. I mean, can you expand on that a little bit and how you perceive it?
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, if we personalize it with Nicola Sturgeon, you may have noticed yesterday she was on the front page of the National saying she intended to be First Minister for the next 5 years. And she was asked a question by an interviewer about whether, if elected, she would stay as First Minister for the next 5 years. And she replied, yes, she would. She would definitely stay as 5. She's got a lot of plans. She definitely intended to stay for the next 5 years and see those out. And she hadn't yet decided whether or not in 2026 she'd still lead the SNP into the next election. She didn't say, well, actually, during the next 5 years, we're going to achieve independence. After that, we may have a different constitution, and we may have, immediately after independence, we may need to have new elections, which is something which I would expect to happen after independence. I wouldn't expect the same Holyrood Parliament to just roll through its full term if we achieved independence 2 years into it, because apart from anything else, there'll be a substantial realignment of political forces on independence. The SNP is a very broad coalition containing some very left-wing people and some very right-wing people. After independence, we're going to have much more normal political parties. That most of the unionist parties, I'm quite sure the Labour Party, for example, will stop being unionist and accommodate itself to being a Labour Party within an independent Scotland. All kinds of things will change. We may have a bicameral constitution. I think almost certainly we will. I don't think as an independent state it's appropriate just to have a single chamber parliament with, which then in effect will have dictatorial powers within the state. There have to be checks and balances. So if you ask me now, what are my plans for what I'm going to do in Scotland for the next 5 years? Now, I'm not even a professional politician, but the first thing I would say to you in my answer is that I expect my plans for what I'm going to do in Scotland and for what happens in Scotland to be radically changed by the fact we will be independent in 2 years. You can't give any answer as to what will happen in Scotland over the next 5 years that doesn't reference independence, unless you're Nicola Sturgeon, in which case, in answering what she's going to do over the next 5 years, independence didn't enter her head. Yes, I'm going to be First Minister for the next 5 years. And yes, I got this program for iPads and play parks. And yes, in 5 years after that, I may stand to be First Minister again. She's just thinking of permanent colonial administration. It fascinates me. I've been challenging supporters of the SNP government for the last 3-4 years over the failure to deliver IndyRef 2. And at first, their answer was always, Nicola has a secret plan. It's coming. It's coming. IndyRef 2 is coming. She doesn't really mean it when she says Boris Johnson has an S30 veto. She's actually got something up her sleeve, which is going, and IndyRef 2 will come. We expected it when the UK voted for Brexit. We expected then that would trigger IndyRef 2. Nothing happened. When Brexit actually happened, we expected that would trigger IndyRef 2. Nothing happened. There's then a 1-year transition period, at the end of which, January last year, Brexit took full effect. And that's when everybody expected IndyRef 2 was about to happen. And Nicola made a big speech at which she announced that she had to respect Boris Johnson's refusal of a Section 30, and she was against wildcat referenda and illegal referenda, that things could only go ahead with the agreement of Westminster. Now, Westminster's not going to agree. And anybody who thinks that the Conservatives are going to agree to a referendum on Scottish independence, which they are going to lose, is nuts. They only agreed to the 2014 referendum because they were quite certain they were going to win it. And they got the shock of their lives when it came so close. They're not going to agree now to a referendum they're going to lose. They're not going to lose Scotland's resources, our fantastic resources in energy, renewable energy, food, water, our amazing human capital. They're not going to lose all that voluntarily. And basically, the SNP is in the control of people who are not rebels. They are basically establishment thinkers. They can't conceive of moving to independence against the will of Westminster. That just doesn't enter their head as a possibility. And they're not really seriously thinking of independence at all. They're thinking of continuing their comfortable lives. And I do believe, I don't apologize for saying, but I think that the very excellent salaries and the ministerial cars and the Sturgeon Murrell household has a combined income of 300,000 quid a year, plus the accommodation, the transport, and that's rather nice. It's quite a lot to put at risk by an independence referendum that you'd have to resign if you lost. I do think that there are an awful lot of political careerists in the SNP who've got their feet under the table and don't want to risk that, because politics is their career, it's their job, and it's all going rather nicely for them. And that's my and in those circumstances, you lose your edge. You convince yourself that with your ministerial car and whatever, you are making life better for the people of Scotland, and coincidentally for yourself too. So that's all very nice for everyone. No, I don't think the people in the SNP have the guts and the stomach it is going to need to achieve independence. Sorry, that was something of a rant. I do.
So I want to get a couple of these questions that are slightly related, and then I'd like to go on to non-Section 30 techniques of achieving independence. So why are the SNP happy with the Greens, who also stand in the constituency vote, but not ALBA, who are a list-only party? So can you maybe help explain the willingness to cooperate with the Greens, but not with ALBA? I think that's probably pretty obvious, but
I think that comes back to exactly what I was saying. And the Greens in no way have independence as a priority. It's something they've always been pretty lukewarm about. And the Greens have the same identity politics agenda as the SNP. Really, their kind of politics gels very well together. Whereas ALBA is something altogether more radical and anti-establishment. Mm-hmm. Yes, the SNP should be furious at the Greens. And the Greens are probably going to stop Angus Robertson being elected in Edinburgh Central between the Greens and Bonnie Prince Bob. And I must say, personally, I don't think the SNP needs to win every single constituency. And if they've got to lose one constituency, I should be delighted if it's that horrible Angus Robertson who's not returned for Edinburgh Central. That will make my heart leap.
I'd like to avoid kind of more personalized comment. Let's see. So regarding the D'Hondt system, questioning your knowledge of the D'Hondt system, he would know that the only certainty is that both votes SNP won a pro-independence majority in both 2011, 2016. That is the only certainty. So just take us through the whole, about the D'Hondt system and how if ALBA does get a certain number of votes, even if they get apparently, I saw some postings that one vote for ALBA in the list seats is worth 10 votes for the SNP. But if you can talk a little bit about the mathematics of that and how the list system works and why basically argue on either side of both votes SNP or constituency SNP and list seats for the ALBA.
I should say, I'll start by saying that complete and utter nonsense to say the only certainty is that the both votes SNP will deliver an SNP majority. That's not necessarily true at all. It depends entirely on what the SNP vote in the constituency is and how the votes for other parties break down under the D'Hondt system. It's very difficult when you don't know how people are going to vote. It's very difficult to say with any certainties at all. But what happens with the D'Hondt system is that in order to deliver an element of proportionality, in each region, you have a certain number of constituencies, and then you also have list MPs who are almost as many, about, I don't know the exact percentage, about 60 to 70% of the parliament are list, 60 to 70% of the constituency MPs are list MPs. So if you have 8 constituency MPs in a region, you'll have about 6 list MPs.
Okay.
And the idea of the list MSPs is to introduce an element of proportionality, so that if one party wins all 8 constituencies, or 6 or 7 of the 8 constituencies, then the other parties who were voted for also get some representation through the list to introduce an element of proportionality. Mm-hmm. And what it does is introduce that element of proportionality by dividing the list votes by a factor of 1 plus the number of constituencies, 1. Mm-hmm. So if you win one constituency, your list votes are divided by 2 and become half value. And if you win no constituencies, your list votes aren't divided at all. Mm-hmm. If you win all 8 constituencies, your list votes are divided by 9. That makes it very, very hard to win a list seat. And that's what happened to the SNP in 3/4 of the regions. They didn't win any list seats at all because they won all the constituency seats. If you're not fighting any constituencies, your list votes will never be divided by anything. They will have full value.
Right.
It is therefore the case that in terms of electing an MSP, an ALBA vote will be worth between 5, depending on the region, will be worth between 5 and 10 times an SNP vote in electing an MSP. There are regions where it will be worth 10 times an MSP vote. There are regions where the SNP only win 4 or 5 seats, where it will be worth 5 times an SNP vote. But an ALBA vote will be worth far, far more in electing.
Specifically because they're not running on the constituency.
Specifically because they're not running on the constituency list. But there's a lot of discussion about whether this is gaming the system. It's using the system. That's certainly true, and it's not what's meant to happen. The system is supposed to operate so that everyone fights the constituency list, and then you don't. It's not supposed to happen that people who vote predominantly one way on the constituency list then vote for a second party. I actually do understand and have a certain amount of sympathy with those people who are upset because they think it's gaming the system. It's clever use of the system, and we've all suffered under the first past the post system, which is a dreadful system. We've got Boris Johnson with a vast majority based on the votes of, I think, 42% of the people who cast their vote at the last election. We have these dreadful electoral systems. The Tories don't say, okay, we're not going to govern, in a dictatorial fashion because we only got 42% of the votes. That would be gaming the system. The Tories don't say that. There is a system that can be exploited, and ALBA is setting out to exploit it. And frankly, it's a no-brainer. Anybody, you really should vote for I would suggest ALBA. If you don't like ALBA, there's nothing stopping you voting for the Greens or whatever. But to vote, the second vote for the SNP is a daft way of, all that does is help unionists get elected, and that's simply true. But because that second SNP vote will be divided by a minimum of 5 or 6 in calculating its weight in electing list MSPs. Whereas if you vote for either the Greens or ALBA, it will have full weight. Now, I believe there may also be other list pro-independence parties still. There seem to be quite a few more list parties than I was expecting there to be. And I should also mention, of course, Martin Keatings, who's standing as an independent. So you don't necessarily have to vote for ALBA. I've given the reasons why I think ALBA is very important, and I certainly should be giving my list vote to ALBA, and I've joined ALBA. But there's no argument. The mathematical argument against giving your list vote to the SNP is overwhelming. It's not, anyone who claims it isn't is just switching off their brain in favor of partisanship. Okay.
All right, and so assuming let's assume that the election takes place, and I just saw a quote of something that there's rumors on Facebook that the Greens are forming a coalition with ALBA for that. I have no idea, but assuming that maybe the SNP wins either a slight majority on the constituency and ALBA takes maybe 20 or more seats, and the Greens take several. How do you see that changing the dynamics of the net? And you were speaking about before about how they can hold the SNP's feet to the fire, so to speak. But what in practical terms could they do? Because as I understand it, Salmond said in his comments as one of his press conferences over the past few days that he's definitely not locked into the Section 30 order. And one of the reasons that the SNP, the Scottish government has cited for wanting the section order is in order to get international recognition, that everybody has to, all the international players need to see that this was done in a constitutional, legal manner in order for Scotland to be recognized. So how do you see different strategies that could be employed by Alba within the Scottish Parliament to achieve independence, and then that subsequent recognition by other states?
Yeah, I think effectively Alba now gives independent supporters a realistic place to go. You know, there are an awful lot of people in the SNP who are unhappy, and it's worth noting that the people coming to Alba are primarily the SNP's longest serving members. You know, it's the people who are most actively pro-independence, the people who were the backbone of the 2014 campaign. You know, the best and most ardent independence bloggers, the people who gave all the speeches up and down the country, and the people who've been in the SNP for 30, 40 years. But those are the backbone of Alba. That's who's joining Alba, not the you know, the Johnny come lately careerists. Let me put it that way. But then the Alba gives somewhere for those people who want Scottish independence, who are currently in the SNP, but who are disaffected with the SNP's lack of prioritization of independence, gives them somewhere to go. And if the SNP in the next Scottish Parliament continues to avoid action for independence, then you'll start to get defections from the SNP to Alba. And Alba will start to, you know, the SNP will be at risk of losing its membership, to being overtaken in the affections of the Scottish people by Alba, in just the way as the old Irish National Party under Redmond was overtaken by Sinn Féin as being, you know, because the old Irish National Party had become part of the British establishment and was theoretically pro-Irish and pro-independence, but didn't actually do anything about it. And it eventually became irrelevant. And that's what the SNP risks. So there's a political dynamic which will force the SNP to be more active just because Alba is there. Because people who are unhappy or disaffected with lack of progress towards independence will have an alternative home. And I think that will play out in the Parliament. You know, if we get 3 years into the next Scottish Parliament and Nicola Sturgeon still hasn't done anything about Scottish independence, or still saying we can't do anything because Westminster does not agree, then I think you would find people crossing the floor and abandoning her in the Scottish Parliament. And I think to avoid that, to avoid losing power in that way, she probably would actually get a move on and make moves towards Scottish independence. What can those moves be? Well, it doesn't require a referendum to become independent, as Alex Salmond has quite rightly said. And you know, he hasn't just said that an S30 is not the only way. He has said a referendum is not the only way, and that's true. You know, winning a plebiscitary election can be the way. The majority of countries in this world, as you know, because it's a slogan almost of mine, I've said it often, the majority of countries in this world have become independent within my own lifetime. And the very large majority of those never had a referendum. Having a referendum is an unusual way to achieve independence, and it's not necessary. Now, obviously, it would be nice to repeat 2014 because it would have the legitimacy of overturning a decision in precisely the same way that decision was made the first time. That gives a level of helpful legitimacy. But if we are blocked from doing that, then we have to move forward another way. And there are many possibilities. One possibility is simply that the elected Scottish Parliament, elected with a majority of independence supporting MSPs, declares independence. And then we hold a confirmatory plebiscite, a referendum after the Declaration of Independence to confirm that. But we hold it after we've declared independence. We hold it as an independent country. So we organize it ourselves. We're independent. We decide the rules of the referendum. We hold it. We run it. That's one way. You can convene a National Assembly. This is something which I've been advocating for many years and which seems to be catching on somewhat, which is that you have a National Assembly comprising all your people elected on a national level. So you hold a National Assembly which comprises of both the MSPs and the MPs. And that National Assembly decides on independence and issues a Declaration of Independence. And then again, you could continue to hold a confirmatory referendum. These are all possible ways forward. Another possibility is to dissolve the Scottish Parliament. Say, we're not allowed a referendum, so we're going to have a specifically plebiscitary election. We're dissolving Parliament, and if re-elected again, we will declare independence. That's another way to do it, and that's a way which would be, I think, fairly sure of gathering international support. Another way is just to hold the referendum ourselves without Whitehall approval. And people say, oh, well, local councils won't agree. You know, that you don't have to be an employee of a local council to be able to hold a ballot box. We have to think out with the establishment strictures on occasion, but we don't know how it's going to come. What I would say to you is, I am 99% certain that the way independence is going to come is not the way the current SNP thinking is it will come. I'm sure there won't be a Section 30. I'm sure there won't be a referendum agreed by Westminster. It's just never going to happen. Independence will happen in a way that Westminster deems illegal. That is how it's going to come. And if you're not prepared to move independence in a way that the Tories and Westminster deem illegal, you don't really believe in independence. Because if you believe we are a people with the right of self-determination, then you cannot believe that the Tories have a right to veto in London. We are people with the right of self-determination. We are sovereign. We are entitled to make a decision as a people without the intervention of Westminster. And as I'm sure you know, and again I've stated on many occasions, the law of the state being seceded from is not the determining factor. And the International Court of Justice has agreed with this, is not the determining factor in whether or not a declaration of independence succeeds. You know, it was illegal for the Baltic states to leave the Soviet Union under Soviet law, but that didn't stop it happening. It's not the law of the preceding state which is the determining factor. So that there are many ways to do this, and the key is international recognition. And of course, at the moment, I think Scotland should stay with the democratic vote of its people to stay in the European Union, because European Union support for Scotland as a potential member is going to be a key factor in gaining that international recognition. Yes. It's international recognition that makes you an independent state. It's not the laws of Westminster.
Yeah. And it gets me onto another thing I wanted to talk about was as I sent in that paper that I sent to you about regarding possible Efta membership relative to EU. And it just seems to me as if, as I said, I communicated with Efta. They let me, and I had a discussion with an official there who basically said, you know, even if Scotland became independent through some kind of plebiscitary process, that they would all that the Scottish government would have to do is send a letter to the Efta Council. They would consider it very sympathetically, and then at their next monthly meeting, and then they would take Scotland's case to the EEA Council with the three EEA members of Efta, which is, there's 4 members of Efta, and Switzerland is not in the EEA, but it's very complicated for them. They have to have all kinds of bilateral treaties and stuff to do that. But that they would help Scotland get back in the EEA, hopefully relatively quickly. And this is just my view. I'd like to get yours, that Efta membership in a short term, nothing excludes the possibility of joining the EU later. But it would be much less contentious, much less complicated. You wouldn't have to even worry about things like convergence criteria or some Spanish veto or whatever. And then Scotland could perhaps just democratically decide later to join the EU, but not in a context of economic desperation where they're not even in this single market. They just have to do whatever to get these markets back. And maybe Scotland will be more comfy in the Efta. And so how do you see it? And based on your knowledge of both?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think there's most unlikely to be any objection to or obstacle to a very, very quick membership of Efta and the EEA for Scotland, and that effectively gives you full single market access and a way into the customs union, which really achieves Scotland's major short-term economic objectives. Mm-hmm. And we are then in the position of other independent European states. The EU, full EU membership, EFTA and DEA effectively, if you're not looking to join the euro anyway, EFTA and DEA takes care of the economic benefits of the EU membership nearly completely, other than things like structural funds and whatever. But the again, I don't think we should be making economic planning on the basis of accessing those in the short term anyway. What it doesn't admit you into is the third pillar, as we used to call it in the old days. I'm sorry, I've lost touch with modern EU terminology, but it doesn't let you into the justice, crime, political cooperation pillars, security cooperation of the EU. But those are far less urgent. And personally, I'm skeptical as to whether we need them at all. But I think you're absolutely right that for an independent Scotland, the immediate need is access into the EU single market, and the way to achieve that is through the rather uncomplicated process of joining EFTA and the EEA.
And from what I understand, with the person I spoke to, the EFTA members are able to choose the programs that they wish to pay into and participate in within Europe. So Erasmus, research programs, all of these, and they can cherry pick them. They can say, "Oh, we'll take part in that and not in that." So it's almost what Brexit could have been, and the way that the Brexiteers were presenting it, but I don't think EFTA would want the RUK in, under those terms. So a question from Suzanne: why can't we join EFTA and the EEA at the moment? Simply put, because Scotland is not a sovereign state, and they have to have, and the Scottish government must have the capacity to sign international treaties and the powers to abide by them in order to join EFTA. But once that's accomplished, and not necessarily through a referendum or Section 30, they will very sympathetically consider, and all it takes is the agreement of the 4 members of EFTA, Liechtenstein, Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland. So do you agree with that? Is that how you see it?
Yeah, no, I do. And I think, well, I've got no doubt at all that would be a first step that Scotland would look to take. It would be crazy not to, because the step of rejoining the European Union may take a little longer. Although even then, I actually think that rejoining the European Union may be a much quicker process for Scotland than people imagine, because Scotland does already meet the acquis, and the European Union is desperate for the political gain of admitting Scotland. The signal sent that if you are daft enough to leave the European Union, your state is going to split up, is a signal that the European Union will be very keen to send. That's why there's so much support now in the European Union for Scotland's membership of the EU. So it may be that the intermittent step of being an EEA, sorry, I'm definitely saying EEA, and the intermittent step of being in the EEA and Efta may be quite a short period. Personally, I would be perfectly happy to just join EEA and Efta and leave the European Union alone. Like many people, I think, I was utterly shocked by the European Union's reaction to the vicious suppression of the referendum in Catalonia. And it wasn't just one part of the European Union, it was the Council, the Commission, and the Parliament all gave wholehearted, full-throated support to the actions of the Spanish authorities, restoring law and order, as they put it. So I've gone off the EU.
The last straw, I totally agree. And the last straw for me was just in the last couple of months, where the EU Parliament voted overwhelmingly to lift the immunity of the Catalan parliamentarians, Ponsati, Toni Comín, and Clara Ponsati. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. That they would do that, and lift their own, lift the immunity of their own parliamentarians. I think that's largely because of Borrell, the foreign minister of who was the Spanish foreign minister before. But let's see. What about Spain? Would they not veto it because of Catalonia? Very possibly. And in the end, let's see how and aside from the treatment of the Catalonia, what do you think might be some of the advantages to staying in Efta rather than the EU?
Mostly political. The European Union increasingly has a common foreign policy, which is no longer really operates as a balance to American foreign policy in the way it used to. The European Union's headed, in a very strange right-wing direction in some ways, and being locked in an ever closer political union with Viktor Orban and the nutters in charge in Poland at the moment. It is not a position I particularly think we want to lock ourselves into. So I'm skeptical at the moment of full European Union membership, but I perfectly understand that that's a minority view. I don't think that's a view which we ought to be pursuing as policy at the moment, because the people of Scotland had a democratic vote in the EU referendum and overwhelmingly voted to join the EU. So I would, I set aside my own personal skepticism. I think we should be aiming ultimately at EU membership, because that is the democratic will of the people of Scotland. And until an event changes that, it's not something I intend to concentrate or campaign on.
Mm-hmm. But certainly relatively easy and rapid accession to Efta would be very desirable, at least in the short term. In mitigating.
No, it's a no-brainer. Definitely that's what we ought to do, and then we ought, as you say, to be negotiating to join the EU from a position of being an Efta member, which already gives us, most of the economic benefits, which would strengthen our negotiating hand for joining.
Well, absolutely. Okay, we'll wrap it up in a few minutes, but just getting a couple more questions in. What would you say that Alba will be Rise version 2? I'm not sure about I don't know a lot about the Rise party, but I don't anticipate that. I mean, do you have any thoughts about the nature of the party that Alba will be, given who the people who are directly involved?
No, I mean, yeah, Rise. I mean, what they're saying is that the Rise party, which personally I didn't support, which arose out of a number of the more radical independence campaigners, carrying on their campaign from the 2014 referendum into a political party for the 2016 Hollywood elections. And what they're getting at is the fact that Rise failed. It didn't get enough votes to get elected. And I think, no, I think that's most improbable. I said all along that a list party would be unlikely to succeed unless it had big names in it. And Alex Salmond obviously is a very big name who dominated Scottish politics for a decade. But not only that, you've got many other ex-MPs and ex-MSPs in the party, and a current MP, and some quite major, well-known figures. Rise didn't have any of that, and Rise never ever, I think, reached 3% in an opinion poll, let alone the 6% that Alba is now at. So
6 days after, or 6 or 7 days after its creation, no less.
Yeah, it's now up to 6%, and I've got no. If you ask me to, to bet my own money, I would say that Alba will get a dozen MSPs, but that's my guess. It will come in with 10 to 11% of the list vote and get a dozen MSPs. That's where I think it's going. That's where I think it will end up, which of course makes it very different to Rise. So no, I don't think it is the same. The other thing is that Alba's not really identified. It is left wing, I think, in its economics, and people like George Caravan have joined Alba, who are important socialist thinkers in Scotland. But it's not the kind of avowedly left-wing project that Rise was, if you see what I mean. So it's different in that way too. No, I don't think comparisons between Alba and Rise are very, very sensible.
Any thoughts on George Galloway getting elected and what he would bring to the Scottish Parliament?
I shall be very controversial here. I hope George Galloway does get elected. Anybody who is a Democrat must believe we should have some unionists in the Scottish Parliament, because unionists still make up, getting on for half of the population. Over 40% of the people out there are unionists, so they should be represented. Given we have to have unionists in Parliament, I would much rather they were interesting people with some interesting perspectives on life, like George Galloway, rather than the boring, stupid establishment lickspittles that you've got in the Labour, Conservative, and Liberal parties. So, I hope there are as few unionists as possible in the Scottish Parliament, but I do hope one of them is George Galloway. I think that would be quite an interesting addition to the Parliament.
All right. Another question is, I'm not quite sure I get the gist of it. Is it not the case that who we vote for in their second vote is irrelevant unless we all agree at a regional level?
We don't all have to agree, but it requires basically a quarter of those people who support independence, or 20% of those people who support independence, are going to have to vote Alba in the second vote for Alba to have, a substantial electoral impact. Alba will get some people elected if 10% of people who support independence vote for them on the regional list. But yeah, you would need 20% of everyone who supports independence to vote for Alba to get that kind of dozen MSPs that I'm hoping they might get. And how you achieve that, does require a certain amount of agreement. You can't have a formal, if there were a formal agreement with the SNP for people to vote Alba on the list vote, that would effectively make it one party. That would be illegal. The electoral referendum would not allow you to do that. Alba are only able to contest the list on the basis that they are in opposition to the SNP, but they're not the same people, they're not the same party. So you couldn't actually have a general agreement that everyone's all going to vote. You couldn't have an agreement which included the SNP, that everyone is going to vote Alba on the list, because that would be gaming the system, and that would be disallowed by the Electoral Commission.
Okay, well, I guess that'll do it for this evening, but anything you'd like to add before we say goodbye to our audience?
Yeah, I think I would, I just like to, the very first question you asked me, which I never got around to answering, which was about my own week and how it felt to have been going to be a candidate for Alliance for Independence and then not being a candidate for Alba. And I think I would say that I don't feel in the least bit put out about this. The Alliance for Independence stood down all of its candidates to give Alba a clear run. I was happy to stand down in that way. I don't know what the chances were of my being elected for Alliance for Independence, but I think there was much more of a chance that Alliance for Independence would end up like Rise than it is that Alba will end up like Rise. I wasn't really standing in the genuine expectation of being elected. I was standing as a chance to campaign. I'm much happier being able to support the Alba campaign, and also that once Alba came into the picture, I should make plain that I didn't want to be an Alba candidate, because I knew that the media would do what they are doing, which is, instead of engaging with the real arguments about what Alba's trying to do, just throw mud at Alex Salmond. And given that my own court case relates specifically to Alex Salmond's court case, it would just give them another way in to throw mud at Alex Salmond. So I didn't want to be an Alba candidate, because it would cause Alba an extra problem they don't need. And I told Alba that, just to make plain that's what happened.
Okay, and just maybe a concluding remark on the way that you see the media dealing with Alba, based on your experience in the whole Salmond case and in the context of the media overall. How do you think they're going to react to Alba, especially especially if its poll numbers begin to steadily increase?
I think it very much depends on that last factor. If its poll numbers don't begin to steadily increase, they will continue to pour contempt and division and simply attack Alex Salmond personally. If its poll numbers do continue to increase, they're going to have to start to engage with some of the arguments, genuine arguments that Alba is deploying. And it's going to be fascinating to see how that comes. I don't expect, the extreme media hostility towards Alba has been remarkable, frankly. But I can't your understatement. I can't think of a single article or report on the mainstream media that hasn't been utterly hostile, with no pretense of being anything other than hostile. But people react to that. People understand that. People know that you can't trust the mainstream media. And in fact, there's a significant percentage of people who will support something on the grounds that the mainstream media hate it. So I'm not expecting the mainstream media to turn down the hatred. At some stage, I believe Alba's poll numbers will continue to rise, to the extent they are going to have to actually engage with the arguments. And that will be interesting to see.
Okay. On that note, we'll say goodbye, but thank you very much, Craig, for being with us this evening, and look forward to having you back again soon with your insight.
Thank you very much. Bye.